Hey guys, tonight we wake up in a world where sandals are standard, olive oil counts as currency, and a balanced breakfast might involve wine, vinegar, or fish, depending on your class, your chores, or your luck with last night's bread. You're in Constantinople, early morning, about the 10th century. The sun isn't up yet, but the city is already alive. There's a gentle clatter of carts on cobbled alleys below. A donkey brays somewhere far off, possibly angry about the load it's been given. You're tucked away in the upper room of a narrow stone house, sandwiched between the family's store and a sleepy rooftop full of pigeons. Your bed is a straw hill mattress, wrapped in linen that's probably been laundered recently. You stretch under a woolen blanket, your limbs aching from yesterday's errands. Remember, hot water's for the wealthy, so your bath last week involved more hope than steam. But now, the scent hits you. Barley bread. Warm, earthy, a little sour. Mixed in is the wood smoke from the tiny hearth downstairs, and faintly, olive oil. Spicy, green, almost grassy, like someone crushed a field into a jar. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, feet landing on cool stone. There's no glass on the windows, just wooden shutters and a bit of linen to keep the worst of the wind out. You pull on your tunic, cinch the belt, and descend the stairs to find your host. Eleni, already fussing at the coals. She gives you a nod, points at a slab of bread resting on a flat ceramic tile near the fire. It's yesterday's, but she's clever. She brushed it with oil, sprinkled it with thyme and wild garlic, and warmed it through till the edges crisped. You sit, taking the piece with both hands. It smells incredible. Tangy from the fermented dough, nutty from the flour, and herbal in the way only real herbs, not dried ones, can offer. Eleni doesn't speak much this early, but she does mutter something about the neighbor's burning pine logs again. You nod, chew slowly, and realize the bread has crunch, chew, and softness in perfect proportion. You're not sure if you're eating breakfast or being baptized into it. This is barley bread, krimnon to the locals. Coarse, made with stone-ground flour, and a starter that smells somewhere between vinegar and sleep. Wheat's expensive here, often imported through the port. Barley, though, grows stubbornly on any patch of land and fills the bellies of every class from servants to senators. Historians still argue whether barley was really the poor man's grain, or whether it gained prestige from its health benefits. Some monasteries prized it for being less corrupted to the spirit than indulgent wheat. Others just liked how it filled the pot cheaply. You mop up a puddle of olive oil pooled in a shallow dish on the table. It's darker than modern oil, with specks of crushed herbs floating on top. This one smells like oregano and maybe coriander? Eleni presses her lips and nods approvingly. You guessed right. The oil's flavor is sharp and ticklish at the back of your throat. Byzantine olive oil wasn't just food. It was medicine, moisturizer, lamp fuel, and sometimes a bribe. You wonder how many political favors started with, "I've brought a little something for your pantry." In the alley outside, you hear a crier passing, announcing something about grain prices and river pirates. Eleni rolls her eyes. It's the third time this month the city's bracing for food shortages. But for now, the coals are hot, the bread is warm, and your stomach is no longer growling like an Anatolian wolf. as you sip a cup of oxymel, a mix of water, honey, and vinegar that tastes like someone tried to pickle tea. You feel strangely awake. Your host chuckles and says it's good for digestion, or headaches, or demons. The texts aren't clear. And maybe it is, because as the first rays of sunlight skim over the city's tiled rooftops, you lean back, belly half full, mouth tingling with herbs and smoke, and think, you're going to like Byzantine breakfast, and you're going to like tomorrow's breakfast even more. You're still seated near the hearth, chewing thoughtfully, when Eleni slides a shallow basket toward you. Inside, fresh dough, dimpled and sticky, with a sharp, sour scent that practically sings of last week's fermentation. She wants help kneading, or at least she wants you to watch without getting in the way. This is how it starts. Barley bread, yes, but today it's being made from scratch, not just reheated. You plunge your hands into the dough. It's rougher than anything from a modern bakery, clinging to your fingers in clumps like it has its own personality. And it kind of does. The sourdough starter, kept alive for who knows how many years, smells like a love letter from a vinegar jar. Eleni tells you it was passed down from her grandmother, who claimed it once traveled in a saddlebag across Cappadocia. Historians still argue whether starters like this were common in households or mostly preserved in communal ovens, but this one has certainly survived. The flour is from stone-ground barley, mixed with a bit of emmer wheat. Less common these days, but it makes the dough feel silkier and helps it puff just enough to avoid being a glorified cracker. You knead it until your arms ache. Then you let it rest beneath a linen cloth dyed with onion skins. Outside, someone bangs a pot to call customers to the bathhouse. You're not invited. Baths here are for very specific days, usually after very specific sins. But the smell of damp cedar floats in through the shutters. Back to the dough. After its first rest, it's shaped into loaves that look more like thick discs, flat enough to cook quickly, but hearty enough to satisfy a laborer. These aren't show-off breads, they're survival with a crust. As Eleni works, she tosses in crushed coriander, a bit of dried mint, and one strange addition, ground fenugreek. It smells oddly like maple syrup mixed with dust. You ask, and she shrugs. Good for the blood, she says, though you're not sure whose. In Byzantine kitchens, herbs weren't just flavor, they were function. A good loaf could soothe a stomach, ward off cold, and even make you dream sweeter. At least, that's what a few 10th century house manuals insisted, written by physicians who may or may not have ever held a wooden spoon. Now comes the olive oil. It's not drizzled, it's poured. Eleni dips her fingers into a ceramic jug and paints the tops of the lobes before they go onto the flat hearthstone. The oil bubbles at the edges, releasing a smell that's practically a religious experience. You imagine monks waking up halfway through their fasts just to sniff the kitchens. The loaves hiss and pop in the heat. You lean close, nose twitching, eyes watering from the smoke, but unwilling to move. As the crusts form, you catch glimpses of how serious bread is here. In this city, bakeries are regulated by imperial law. There are price controls, weight requirements, and even occasional riots when flour runs short. Bread isn't just food, it's politics and power and prayers in the form of dough. The emperor might hold the scepter, but the baker holds your next meal. And here's the quirky part. Some loaves are stamped, not with brands or slogans, but with crosses, saints, or even tiny fish. The practice is half art, half superstition. Eleni shows you her own stamp, a wooden block with a chipped lamb symbol. She presses it lightly into one loaf, whispering a few words you can't quite catch. The smell now is warm, faintly bitter, and undeniably alive. You tear into a finished round, the crust flaking into your lap. Inside it's dense but tender, flecked with herbs, and surprisingly moist. The oils soaked deep, giving it a chewy, almost meaty satisfaction. You eat in silence, except for the occasional bird call or shouted insult from the alley. One neighbor is arguing about lentil taxes again. Some things never change. Eleni laughs quietly when you ask if this bread is special. It's breakfast, she says, not a festival, but her eyes linger on the crust like it's something sacred. And maybe it is. You finish your piece, lips glossy with oil, hands dusted in flour, heart beating just a little slower. The morning stretches before you, filled with markets, errands, and maybe a lesson in cheese, if you're lucky. For now, though, it's just you, the smell of baking bread, and the soft crackle of firewood in a world that never quite sleeps, but still knows how to wake you up with flavor. You barely have time to wipe the flour from your hands before Eleni gestures for you to follow. Apparently, breakfast isn't finished. There's something else you need to taste. She wraps a cloth around a small basket and tells you you're heading to the goat pens on the city's edge. The air outside is sharp with morning damp and sea breeze. Constantinople's domes glint faintly in the distance, but the roads here are narrow and worn. You dodge stray cats, sleepy donkeys, and at least one boy hawking fig paste before arriving at a modest stone building tucked behind a tangle of cypress trees. Inside it smells like straw, salt, and something distinctly goatish. A man named Theodoros greets Eleni with a nod. He's already stirring a wide copper pot over a low flame, and whatever's in there smells somewhere between yogurt and socks. Don't panic, this is cheese. Fresh, soft, and powerful. Specifically, it's a type of mizithra, a beloved breakfast staple among Byzantines, made from goat or sheep's milk, often mixed with a bit of whey and salt. You sit on a stump while Theodoros ladles the steaming liquid into cloth pouches hanging over a trough. The whey drips slowly, the curds firm gently. It's a quiet process, almost hypnotic, and you find yourself watching the steam curl upward like incense in a chapel. Historians still argue whether mizithra originated with the Greeks or became distinct during Byzantine times, but either way, it's serious business. Theodoros insists on a specific stirring rhythm, a certain amount of silence, and absolutely no sneezing near the curds. They can feel your mood, he says solemnly. You believe him. Once the cheese has cooled, he gives you a palm-sized round, crumbly, white, still warm. You bite in. It's salty, a little tangy with a surprisingly creamy finish. There's no rind, no crust, no fanfare, just flavor. The kind that insists you slow down and chew properly. Isortos hands you a bowl of honey next. Not the golden syrup you're used to, but something darker and thicker. Byzantine bees, it turns out, had access to wild herbs and flowers you couldn't name, even with a plant guide. You drizzle a tiny spoonful over the cheese and take another bite. Sweet and salty, creamy and floral, all at once. Breakfast in Constantinople wasn't always elaborate, but it was clever, combining simple things in ways that felt almost luxurious. Mizithra with honey, bread with herbs, eggs with vinegar. You begin to suspect the Byzantines knew how to savor their mornings better than we do now, with our drive-through coffees and 5-minute oatmeal. There's a curious addition to the cheese plate today: crushed pistachios. Imported, expensive, and definitely not something your average laborer would eat daily. But Theodoros likes to experiment. He claims the emperor's cook once passed through this very yard and stole his pistachio idea. Eleni raises an eyebrow. You raise too. As you eat, you notice an amphora leaning against the wall, half buried in hay. It's for storing milk, but it's sealed with wax and stamped with what looks like a crude drawing of a cat. Theodoros explains it's to ward off thieves. Cheese theft, apparently, was a minor but persistent crime, particularly during religious fasts, when dairy became black market gold. You sip a warm herbal tisane, made from sage, mint, and a sprig of something you're told repels coughs, demons, or both. The cheese settles comfortably in your stomach, and for a moment you understand why this simple food mattered so much. It was nourishment, comfort, and community, all in one small, salty package. You help Eleni carry 2 wrapped bundles back to her house. One is for her cousin, the other for a neighbor with a new baby. Cheese was a gift, a greeting, and sometimes even a quiet apology in Byzantine life. And as the morning sun stretches higher over the rooftops, you wonder, what else might these people have eaten before lunch? You suspect the answer might involve something even fishier. By now, the city is fully awake. Vendors are yelling about pears, shoe repairs, and guaranteed unwatered wine. Chickens flutter in baskets, a toddler is chasing a very disinterested cat. And you? You're following your nose toward something decidedly fishy. Eleni peels off down a side alley near the Blikerni Quarter, muttering that you'll never understand breakfast until you've met the fishmongers. The air shifts the moment you turn the corner. Gone is the warm, smoky scent of bread ovens. Here it smells like salt, seaweed, and yesterday's herring. The docks aren't far, and neither is the source of that smell. An entire street of stalls, barrels, and wooden crates teeming with slippery silver fish. One stall sells nothing but sardines, another specializes in dried anchovies, while a third offers smoked eel coiled like a tiny rope rug. You stop at a booth where a woman named Leontia is stirring something over a brazier. You lean in, cautiously. Fish stew. Specifically, anchovy stew with vinegar, garlic, and wild leeks. It's pungent in the way that clears your sinuses, and possibly your karmic debts. You're offered a bowl without ceremony. It's hot, oily, and swirling with tiny fish, herbs, and something that might be lentils. You blow on the surface and take a sip. It is alarmingly good. The anchovies melt in your mouth, salty, rich, and soft, like fish butter. The garlic punches through the oiliness, and the vinegar adds a welcome sting. There's a whisper of dill, maybe a shard of dried citrus peel, and beneath it all, barley flour, used not as a thickener, but to give the soup body, a faint chew, like eating silk soaked in seawater. Leontia grins as you cough gently from the vinegar. Wakes you up, doesn't it? She says, handing you a crust of bread that's been fried crisp in olive oil. You mop up the stew, making small, contented sounds you hope aren't too obvious. Historians still argue whether this kind of dish was standard breakfast fare or more of a dockside snack, but the sources agree. Fish was everywhere, cheap, abundant, and versatile. Not just in soup. Smoked, salted, grilled, pickled, fermented. You learn about tarichus, a generic word for preserved fish that basically covered everything from surprisingly delicious to a war crime in brine. Some kinds were so popular that shops specialized in one species only, like Byzantine poke bowls, but with 900% more salt. Another delicacy? A spread made from mashed sardines, olive paste, and vinegar. Leontia scoops some onto a flat biscuit and hands it to you. It's sharp, umami-rich, and slightly terrifying, but also oddly addictive. You find yourself licking your fingers despite the smell. By now, the sun is glinting off the Sea of Marmara, and the street is growing crowded. Porters haul baskets of squid. A priest haggles loudly over a suspiciously large tuna. A boy tries to barter a song for a smoked mullet and is promptly chased off. You pause by a barrel labeled in faded red wax. Garum. The infamous fermented fish sauce. A thick, amber liquid made by layering fish guts, salt, and herbs, then letting the whole thing rot delicately under the sun for months. You are offered a taste. You take a deep breath, close your eyes, and sip. It's intense, salty, savory, with a deep, almost meaty complexity that makes your tongue tingle. Not as horrifying as expected, more like soy sauce met anchovy oil in a back alley and exchanged secrets. You nod slowly. The vendor bows like he's just performed magic. Garum was the ketchup of the ancient world, and by the Byzantine era it had become an art form. Different provinces had their own blends. Some used figs, some threw in honey. Others guarded their ingredients like state secrets. It was poured over eggs, mixed with herbs for spreads, and even stirred into wine. Yes, wine. And here's your quirky tidbit for the day. One Byzantine recipe involves mixing garum with egg yolk, goat cheese, and crushed almonds, then spreading it on toast. Historians still aren't sure if it was for breakfast or revenge. You finish your stew, cheeks flushed, lips tingling, and thank Leontia. She nods, tells you to return tomorrow for smoked mussels. If the tides are kind, you believe her. As you step back into the sunlit street, stomach full of anchovy stew and bravery, you realize something. This city may be ancient, crowded, and occasionally fish-scented, but it knows how to eat. And the day has barely begun. You walk back toward Elene's neighborhood with a slight swagger, as though anchovy stew at dawn has permanently changed your outlook on life. Your breath smells like vinegar and fish. Your fingertips are still oily from that sardine paste, and frankly, you've never felt more alive. But just as your stomach begins to rumble again, fish isn't exactly filling. You hear it, a faint, rhythmic tinkling, like glass beads in a pouch. You follow the sound, rounding a corner into a narrow courtyard where a pair of vendors are unrolling carts piled high with dates, dried figs, and small clay jars sealed with wax. This is the city's version of a breakfast dessert bar. One vendor, a wiry old man named Pavlos, waves you over and taps the lid of a squat amphora. He removes the wax seal and reveals something sticky, golden, and slow-moving. Honey. Thick, dark, and aromatic, with the scent of thyme and maybe burnt orange. He hands you a fig, dried until leathery but still soft, then slits it open and spoons in a dab of the honey. You bite. It's pure joy. Chewy, rich, with little seeds that crunch like whispers between your teeth. Byzantines didn't have chocolate, but this is how they sweeten the soul. Pavlos also offers you a date stuffed with walnuts and dusted in cinnamon, which he says is guaranteed to wake up even a dying bishop. You ask if he means that literally. He doesn't answer. Across the courtyard, a young woman sells pastili, a kind of sesame honey bar that cracks under your teeth and coats your mouth in earthy sweetness. It's not quite modern candy, but it's comforting, chewy, and possibly the exact thing emperors demanded between morning meetings and minor coups. Historians still argue whether sugar was known to Byzantines at this time. Some claim Persian traders brought tiny amounts of crystallized sugar through Silk Road connections. Others say the Byzantines only encountered sugar much later, and what they used in sweets was always honey, grape must, or carob syrup. You chew a bite of something called militria, a jelly-like treat made from boiled wine must, thickened with flour and sweetened with raisins. It tastes like the Byzantine version of a fruit roll-up, if the fruit had been blessed by 5 saints and aged in a clay jar behind a basilica. And the drinks. Pavlos pulls out a narrow jug and pours a splash of something syrupy into a cup. It's oxygala, a fermented milk drink slightly sweetened and served cold. It's halfway between kefir and an accidental cheese experiment, but it works alongside the figs. You sip cautiously. It fizzes ever so slightly. Your stomach murmurs. You pretend it's approval. There's also mulsum, a drink made from watered-down wine and honey. Yes, wine again. These people have no qualms about light alcohol with breakfast. It's diluted, flavored with spices like clove or cinnamon, and meant to soothe the belly and sharpen the senses. Or at least make meetings with your in-laws more tolerable. By now your fingers are sticky. Pavlos hands you a strip of linen soaked in lemon water to clean up. You thank him and nearly walk away when he offers you one last oddity, candied eggplant. You stare. Yes, eggplant. Peeled, boiled, with honey, cloves, and citrus peel until it's translucent and sweet. You try a bite. It's bizarre and somehow delicious. The texture is jelly-like but firm. The flavor is more orange than aubergine. It tastes like something that should be wrong, but feels so right. Eleni appears again, laughing at your sticky hands and stunned expression. He always saves that for the bold ones, she says. The timid only get dates. Together you sit on the edge of the fountain in the courtyard, licking syrup from your thumbs and watching a rooster chase its own shadow. You're starting to understand that Byzantine breakfasts were more than just food. They were moments, little pauses in the day to gather, gossip, and get just enough sugar to power through another round of city noise. And you realize something else. Without clocks, without alarms, without espresso, this civilization built a rhythm of life from barley and honey, figs and fish, quiet jokes and oily bread. And it worked. Your stomach is full, your teeth are coated in sweetness, and your eyes are already scanning the street for your next bite. Don't worry, it's eggs. You're waddling a bit now. Between the anchovies and candied eggplant, your body is confused but grateful. Eleni walks ahead, leading you through another zigzag of alleyways, past a tired-looking fountain, under laundry strung like prayer flags, and into the shady corner of a public courtyard where 3 old men are arguing about chickens. And just beyond them, a woman cracking eggs into a pan that looks older than the city walls. This, Eleni whispers dramatically, is Doria, the egg lady. Not her official title, of course, but close enough. Doria's known for frying eggs that are, in the words of a local priest, miraculous. You're skeptical. You've had eggs, so what? Then you watch her work. No butter. Butter's too precious, too perishable. She uses olive oil, generously. It hisses and bubbles across the iron pan like it's telling secrets. She cracks duck eggs, not chicken, into the center. The whites bloom outward, the yolks sit like tiny suns, and the herbs she sprinkles on top are crushed between her palms like a sorceress invoking flavor. You catch hints of savory, similar to oregano but muskier, and crushed sumac, which smells like citrus and twilight. Then comes the vinegar, not just a splash, a full ladle, sizzling as it hits the oil. The entire pan turns into a symphony of sound and steam. You sit on a bench. Doria drops a piece of barley bread in the oil to soak, flips the egg once, just briefly, then plates it directly into your hands. You bite in. The yolk is rich, deeply orange and creamy. The vinegar cuts the fat like a hot knife through fog. The herbs make it fragrant and ancient all at once. This isn't just a fried egg. This is an edible sunrise. You moan, audibly. A nearby donkey seems impressed. Alini laughs. Told you, she says. Doria nods approvingly and waves a cracked wooden spoon like a scepter. Now here's the thing. Eggs in the Byzantine world were surprisingly controversial. Monasteries regulated their consumption. Some fasts banned them, others encouraged their use for the ill or the pregnant. Historians still argue whether eggs were an everyday food or a semi-sacred ingredient reserved for feast days and nobles with good hen connections. What's clear is that people prized them. Duck, goose, quail, variety was abundant depending on where you lived. And eggs weren't just for frying. You hear whispers about an early egg custard served cold, with cinnamon and honey. Some sources even mention pickled eggs, rolled in herbs, though no one seems brave enough to replicate that today. One man in the courtyard, listening to your rave reviews, offers a story. His grandfather claimed to have served fried eggs to a general before battle. The general survived, barely. The eggs, however, were remembered longer than the battle itself. There's another rumor, a favorite of Doria's, that Emperor Basil II once ordered his eggs fried in rosewater instead of vinegar. It was a disaster. Everyone involved had to eat them anyway. There were tears. You glance at your now empty plate and feel something unexpected. Sorrow. You want another. Doria tells you to come back next week. She only makes one per customer per day. To keep it holy, she says. Completely serious. As the sun climbs higher and the smell of fried herbs lingers in your hair, you think again about this egg. Not because it was extravagant, but because it wasn't. The oil, the vinegar, the herbs, they're all simple, but the result is magic. Byzantines understood that breakfast wasn't about rushing. It wasn't something you ate in the saddle or in the shadows of a meeting room. It was a beginning. A kind one if you did it right. You rise, nod your thanks to Doria, and she hands you a sprig of savory to chew on. For clarity, you're not sure if it's working, but it smells amazing. Illy leads you onward again. Your stomach is full, but your curiosity. Next up, monks, garlic, and something that may or may not be soup. You're heading uphill now, feet dragging slightly from the weight of multiple breakfasts, but Eleni assures you the view is worth it. You pass rows of fig trees, a stretch of crumbling aqueduct, and a boy selling lukewarm pomegranate juice from a cracked jug. Eventually, the city noise fades behind you. Ahead looms a quiet compound, walled in stone, with cypress trees leaning in like gossiping aunties. A bell chimes softly in the courtyard beyond, one of those low, hollow tones that sounds like it's been waiting centuries to be heard. Welcome to the monastery. Eleni bows her head slightly and gestures for you to keep your voice down. You're here to sample a breakfast most outsiders never experience, a monastic morning meal eaten in silence, prepared with reverence, and spoiler alert, absolutely loaded with garlic. A young monk named Alexius, who looks like he hasn't slept since the last crusade, greets you with a subtle nod and leads you down a shaded hallway into a simple stone dining room. Wooden benches, a long table, and, praise be, a faintly steaming pot near the hearth. There's no chatter, just the clink of ladles and the rustle of linen robes. Alexios serves you a wooden bowl filled with something pale, brothy, and pungent. You brace yourself and take a sip. Garlic soup, and not just any garlic soup. This one is sharp, intense, and strangely invigorating. It hits your nose before your tongue, with that signature garlicky sting that feels both holy and slightly rude. There are hints of onion, vinegar, stale bread crumbled in for thickness, and maybe a touch of mint to keep things civilized. You dip a spoon again. It grows on you, like an acquired taste you didn't know your soul needed. And as your body warms from the inside, you begin to understand why this was the monastic breakfast of choice. Simple ingredients, humble execution, maximal impact. The monks eat quietly, heads bowed. You follow suit. The silence is oddly soothing. No small talk, no vendors shouting about walnuts, no arguments over chicken prices, just you, the garlic, and the echo of a spoon scraping wood. Historians still argue whether such meals were eaten daily or only on specific days of fasting or labor. Some suggest garlic soup had medicinal status, used to stimulate digestion, repel illness, or, according to one dubious source, quieten unruly thoughts. You wonder what qualifies as unruly in this crowd. As you eat, Alexios places a tiny earthenware dish of garum near your bowl. Just a dab, enough to mix in a key if you dare. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Optional, he whispers. You add it, you regret nothing. The flavor deepens. The saltiness complements the sharpness of the garlic, creating a kind of Byzantine umami that coats your tongue and clears your sinuses. Then comes a surprise, a slice of dried pear soaked in vinegar and honey, served as a palate cleanser. It's sweet-sour, chewy, and unexpectedly elegant. The monks don't indulge often, but when they do, it's subtle, humble, and deeply thought through. Alexios breaks the silence once more to offer a piece of dark bread laced with fennel seeds. Yesterday's loaf, he says, best with soup. And he's right. It soaks up the broth perfectly, the seeds adding tiny bursts of licorice-like flavor. As you sit in the quiet warmth, your belly full and your nose gently singed, you notice something carved into the wall. It's faint but clear, a tiny fish beside a loaf of bread, a monastic symbol of sustenance, humility, and grace. Here's your quirky tidbit for the morning. In some Byzantine monasteries, monks trained as herbalists were forbidden from eating garlic during periods of deep contemplation, believing it might inflame the body. Meanwhile, others insisted it was essential to keeping demons, out of the liver. Make of that what you will. You finish your bowl slowly, letting the last sips linger. Outside, the bell chimes again. The monks rise. The meal is over. You nod your thanks, step out into the daylight and feel the wind press against your face. Eleni's waiting, amused. "You smell like a kitchen fire," she says fondly. "Let's get you a drink." Because yes, next customer, wine, but not the kind you'd expect with breakfast. The air has shifted again. You're back in the city proper, walking slowly through the sloping alleys of Constantinople, the scent of garlic trailing faintly behind you like a very determined ghost. Eleni, unfazed, is leading you toward a small wine shop that doesn't advertise itself as a wine shop. No sign, no shouting vendors, just a faded red cloth hanging over the doorway and a single carved amphora beside the entrance. Inside, the air is cool and heavy with spice. Shelves of ceramic jugs line the walls, their surfaces scratched with chalk marks and tied with scraps of parchment. Someone's system, surely. At the center of the room stands a low table with a few stools and a wide-bellied man with a towel over one shoulder who greets Eleni by name and calls you Garlic Face with an affectionate smirk. This is Markianos, local philosopher, amateur vintner, and purveyor of one of the Byzantine Empire's strangest breakfast rituals, spiced morning wine. Yes, wine. In the morning, not for indulgence, not for escape but for clarity, or so they say. Markianos pours a modest amount of mulled wine into a clay cup. It's warm, deep red, and smells of cloves, cinnamon, a hint of rosemary, and something floral you can't quite place. He gestures for you to sip. You do. It's sweet at first, almost too sweet, but then the heat hits the back of your throat and the spices bloom. There's a warmth that travels down your chest and spreads outward. You raise your eyebrows. Eleni is already sipping hers with great satisfaction. This wasn't a commoner's breakfast item, to be clear. Mulled wine at dawn was more common among merchants, philosophers, scribes, those whose mornings began not with a plow, but with paperwork. It was said to steady the hand and sharpen the wit, and let's be honest, it probably made ancient tax forms slightly more tolerable. Historians still argue whether spiced wine was a morning staple or just a fashionable indulgence. There's some evidence it doubled as medicine, prescribed for coughs, melancholy, or excess dampness of spirit, a diagnosis that feels suspiciously like a hangover. Markianos prepares a second cup with a variation he calls sailor strength. This one's heavier on the black pepper and includes a small splash of vinegar. You take a sip and feel like your blood is doing jumping jacks. Eleni cautions you not to drink too quickly, or you'll hallucinate the emperor asking you for taxes. Alongside the wine, Markianos offers a small dish of quince jam served with soft cheese on a thin barley cracker. The jam is golden, almost translucent, with a texture between jelly and fruit leather. It's tangy, sweet, and incredibly fragrant. The pairing with the salty cheese is divine. It feels like something stolen from an imperial breakfast tray. Speaking of which, Markianos leans in conspiratorially and tells you that some claim Emperor Constantine VII began every morning with a mulled wine blessed by 7 herbs and a single date. No one knows what the 7 herbs were, of course. Scholars have guessed basil, mint, wormwood, thyme, rose petals, bay, and pennyroyal, but it's never been confirmed. And the date? A symbol, perhaps, or maybe he just liked fruit. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Byzantine cooks boiled grape must with lavender and hyssop to make a concentrated syrup that was later diluted with hot wine. It was called de frutum, and it was said to bring dreams of clarity and visions of one's better nature. You're not sure about the visions, but you definitely feel calm, slightly toasted, and extremely fond of your own elbow. You nibble the last of your cracker and swirl the last of the spiced wine. The world outside hums faintly through the thick walls. Marcianos says nothing more. He doesn't need to. The Byzantines believed in harmony, of flavor, of humors, of morning rituals that prepared body and soul. Wine wasn't excess, it was balance, when used wisely. You set down the cup, thank your host, and rise slowly, a soft warmth settling in your chest like a cat curling into sleep. Lainey pats your arm. Now, she says, you've tasted what philosophers drink. Let's go see what emperors chew. And you're off again, slightly light-headed, fully intrigued, and very much ready for gold-trimmed breakfasts. You're still floating a little from the wine, nothing dangerous, just that pleasant, warm linen on your skin sensation that makes you forget which alley had the fish vendor and which had the aggressively political geese. Eleni leads the way, weaving past musicians setting up near a fountain, and a man furiously trying to repair his sandal with a chicken feather. Then you see it. The great palace of Constantinople doesn't announce itself with fanfare or even much sound, just sheer presence. Massive walls, polished marble, and rooftops catching sunlight like they were built to do just that. This is where the emperors live, legislate, pray, plot, and, most importantly for today, eat breakfast on silver trays. You don't enter through a grand hall. That's for diplomats. You're taken through a servant's gate, around a rose garden, and into the back corridors of the imperial kitchens. It's a bustling space, equal parts smoke and murmurs, with copper pots suspended like weapons, and cooks moving with the quiet aggression of artists at work. A young kitchen scribe named Stephanos greets you. He's got ink on his fingers and a look that says he's memorized half the pantry inventory. He guides you to a bench and hands you a slim slice of sesame bread, topped with soft white cheese and, yes, quince jam again. But this time the jam sparkles faintly. Crystallized ginger. The first bite is complex. The sesame crunch gives way to creaminess. Then that zesty, sweet ginger slice delivers a quiet zing. It tastes like someone very wealthy has forgiven you for a very minor crime. Breakfast for emperors, it turns out, isn't one large meal. It's a series of elegant bites served over conversation, documents, or strategy meetings. Silver trays are carried into private rooms bearing dates stuffed with crushed hazelnuts, wafers dipped in rose syrup, or the fabled sweet cheese pies. Thin, flaky, and so delicate they dissolve on your tongue like powdered snow. Stephanos lifts a linen cloth to reveal one such pie. He offers you a taste, and you do not hesitate. The pastry is buttery and paper-thin, layered with a soft cheese filling gently sweetened with honey and saffron. The flavor is subtle, clean, and somehow regal, like it wouldn't dare offend your palate. You hum approvingly. Eleni snatches a corner before you can finish it all. Now here's the mainstream fact. Imperial meals were regulated to reflect dignity, not indulgence. The emperor might have access to rare spices, imported nuts, or unusual fruits, but he was expected to eat modestly, intentionally. Lavish displays were for banquets, not breakfast. Still, there were indulgences. Mastic, a resin from Chios, was often infused in sweetened milk or wine. It had a piney, fresh taste and was rumored to settle the stomach and calm the nerves. Stephanos lets you sniff a bottle. It smells like a forest after rain. The kitchen also prepares preserved rose petals in syrup, which are served with flatbread or soft eggs, depending on the day. One tray carries small fig and anise cakes dusted with almond flour, another a single poached pear resting in wine reduction. It looks too perfect to eat. You try it anyway, no regrets. Stefan leans in and shares a little gossip. One emperor insisted that no breakfast tray be repeated within a fortnight. Another demanded a cup of lukewarm goat's milk, stirred clockwise only. And once, during a solar eclipse, no tray was served at all, interpreted as a sign that even emperors should fast when the sky says so. Historians still debate whether the emperor ate alone or among his concilium, the advisory court. Some texts describe solitary morning walks, followed by quiet meals. Others suggest group readings of scripture or imperial edicts shared over trays of dried fruit and herbed cheese. Your quirky tidbit? In some imperial homes, kitchen staff were required to sing prayers over each tray before it left the scullery. To ensure pious digestion, as one account wryly puts it. Stephanos chuckles and admits most cooks just hummed old folk songs and hoped for the best. As you nibble a final bite of sugared almond pastry, Eleni touches your elbow. "You've had the emperor's breakfast," she says. "Now let's see what the rest of us eat when we can't afford breakfast at all." You brush off the crumbs, thank the ink-fingered scribe, and follow her once again, into the streets, where bread is counted in half-loaves and hope. You leave the palace kitchens with just a trace of saffron on your breath, and the soft clink of silver trays still echoing in your ears. The streets beyond feel different now, busier, harsher, a little less like honey and a little more like iron. You're heading into a neighborhood where breakfast isn't served with song or on engraved pewter. This is the workman's Constantinople, and it begins before the sun is even fully risen. The alleys here are narrower, the houses more weathered. Linen hangs between windows. Dogs bark not out of boredom, but out of routine. The scent of wood smoke still hangs in the air, but it's laced with something stronger: yeast, charcoal, and the unmistakable smell of dough baking directly on stone. You follow Eleni past a shop front, where the shutters are propped open just enough to let out heat. Inside, a young boy, no older than 10, is pulling flatbreads from a brick oven with a stick longer than he is tall. His name is Niketas, and this is his family's livelihood, breakfast for those who can't make it themselves. He hands you a hot disk of bread, wrapped in a twist of papyrus. It's thinner than the palace loaves, speckled with sesame seeds, and warm enough to burn your fingertips slightly. You tear off a bite. It's dense, chewy, and deeply satisfying. It tastes like morning labor and the hope of coin. The bread is called laganon, a flatbread often flavored with onion or garlic, depending on what's cheap that week. This one has neither, but it does have a crust that crackles faintly as you chew. Niketas grins as you eat, then gestures behind him at a shallow clay pot. Inside is a mash of boiled lentils, vinegar, and dried herbs, a kind of portable stew scooped up with the bread. You try it. It's earthy, tart, and salty enough to keep you thirsty for hours. In other words, perfect fuel for a morning spent hauling baskets, sweeping streets, or, if you're lucky, watching someone else do those things. Here's your mainstream fact. Street food was essential in Byzantine cities. Most homes didn't have full kitchens. People relied on public ovens, shared pots, and vendors like Niketas to get through the day. Breakfast, if it happened at all, had to be fast, cheap, and carried in one hand. But there were limits. A loaf of bread cost a small copper follies. And if grain prices rose, due to bad weather, trade delays, or war, even this modest meal could become unaffordable. Credit was common, especially in poor neighborhoods. A baker like Niketas' father might keep a running tally of debts on a scrap of wood, forgiving the ones he couldn't collect if he was feeling generous. Or if it was a saint's day, historians still argue whether bakers profited or suffered most during shortages. Some say they hoarded flour, others that they fed the hungry at their own loss. What's certain is that when bread ran low, tempers flared. Grain riots weren't rare, they were expected. Eleni pulls you aside and points to a woman selling small cups of lentil mash mixed with vinegar and crushed olives. It's sold cold, eaten with fingers, and slightly sour. You try it, it's not glamorous, but it fills you up in a way imperial pastries never could. And here's your quirky tidbit. During hard times, some bakers mixed sawdust into flour to stretch it. Not poison, just filler. The practice was outlawed, but enforcement was spotty, and you learn to chew carefully when times are lean. As you sit on a low wall beside Niketas' stall, tearing bites from the bread, you notice something beautiful. A man with rough hands, still dusted in lime from the construction site, sits beside you and eats the same thing. No words, no status, just breakfast. And maybe that's the charm of street food. It erases the layers. Here, you're not a visitor, or a noble, or a scholar. You're just someone who needs fuel. You finish the last bite. Eleni pays for both with a coin and a wink. Niketas blushes. She tousles his hair. You watch as he turns back to the oven. Another batch, another fire, another hour. And you think to yourself, not for the first time, breakfast in Byzantium is never just about hunger. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's kindness. And sometimes it's both. The sky is brighter now, truly morning. And with the warmth of fresh bread still in your belly, you and Eleni turn into a wider avenue near the city's heart. It's louder here. More elbows, more carts, more urgency. There's tension in the air that wasn't there earlier, and even the pigeons seem unsettled. Something's wrong. You pass a shop shuttered mid-morning, unusual, and a fish seller packing up early, grumbling to herself in rapid Greek. Eleni slows. She tilts her head and listens. Then you both hear it. Snippets of worried talk. No grain ships. Delayed in the straits. Port closed. Uh-oh. This is the Byzantine breakfast's worst enemy. A wheat shortage. You stop at a nearby bakery, expecting the usual smell of yeast and ash, but instead the oven is cold. Inside, the baker, an older man named Sergios, with soot permanently etched into his fingers, is pacing like a man trying not to scream. No flour, he tells Eleni flatly. None at all. The ships are stuck in Chios, or Samos, or sunk, depends who you ask. You peer into the empty flour bins. They look cavernous, dusty, abandoned. Not even barley is left. Not the gritty, chewy fallback you thought would always be there. Sergio's gestures at his backup plan. Cakes of chickpea mash mixed with old lentil flour, dried until firm and baked on a flat stone. It's food, he mutters. Barely. You try a bite. It's chalky, bitter, and a little desperate. But it'll do. Here's the mainstream fact. Grain shortages were common in Constantinople. As a city dependent on imports, it lived and died by trade routes. One bad storm or a political blockade could raise prices overnight and leave ovens cold for weeks. And here's your quirky tidbit. In extreme shortages, the state distributed emergency rations called demosión citos, public wheat. But distribution was chaotic. People often waited in line for hours only to find the sacks empty or corrupted with weevils. Some claimed you had to bribe a clerk just to be counted. Others whispered that monks hid flour beneath their robes to avoid confiscation. Eleni sighs and pulls you back into the street. You pass a woman trying to sell crushed bean cakes, flavored with vinegar and wild herbs to mask their bitterness. She offers you one for half a coin. It's better than the chickpea brick, but only barely. Hunger has a way of making even bland things seem important. At a crossroads, you hear a crowd yelling near the forum. Not a riot, not yet, but loud, angry voices. The merchants lied. The ships are here, just hoarding it all. You don't stop. You've seen enough markets to know the difference between business and desperation. Historians still argue whether these shortages were manipulated, deliberate schemes by merchant guilds to hike prices, or the natural consequence of overpopulation and fragile trade networks. Maybe it was both. Maybe everything is both when money's involved. You turn a corner and spot a small shrine where a few women are lighting candles, not for the dead, but for bread. There's a faint smell of rosemary and desperation. One woman leaves a piece of barley cracker wrapped in linen beside the flame, an offering, a memory, maybe a promise, and all the while the city carries on. Boys run errands, priests chant in distant chapels, cats still steal sardines from inattentive fishmongers. But the tension remains, invisible and thick as smoke. You chew the last of your bitter lentil cake, brushing crumbs from your tunic. It's not satisfying, but it's enough. And just as your stomach tightens with the realization that even breakfast can vanish, Eleni touches your shoulder. There's a courtyard up ahead, she says. Women's table, quiet, always something warm. You nod. Time to see what resourcefulness looks like on days when even bread is missing. The alley narrows again, pulling you into a quieter part of the city where the voices are softer and the stone walls seem to lean inward, sheltering something sacred. Eleni walks with a different kind of step here. Not fast, not cautious, but respectful. You pass no vendors, no monks, no bakers, just shutters half closed, laundry swaying, and the scent of warm herbs floating like incense through the still air. You enter a courtyard, not large, but sun-dappled and enclosed by a vine-covered colonnade. A fountain murmurs gently in the center, its basin ringed with clay bowls and small bundles wrapped in linen. Around it sit 6 or 7 women, older, younger, some in faded tunics, one in a robe trimmed with careful embroidery. They're not eating yet, they're preparing. This is a women's breakfast table, not a tavern, not a vendor's stall, but a quiet, shared ritual. And you are, very gently, invited to join. A girl offers you a stool beside her. Her name is Theodora, and she's chopping boiled eggs into small pieces and sprinkling them with vinegar, mint, and what might be coriander seed. You watch her hands move, graceful, practiced, like she's done this every day of her life. Probably has. Beside her, an older woman named Maria is peeling what looks like boiled turnips, which she then drizzles with fermented grape syrup and a dusting of crushed fennel. It's a strange combination, but the smell is warm, sweet, and curiously comforting. You're handed a small flatbread spread with herbed yogurt, the top speckled with black sesame and chopped onion. It's cool, tangy, and bright. You chew slowly as the sounds of the city fade behind the courtyard walls. Irini nods toward one of the women, Irene, perhaps in her 60s, carefully placing roasted chickpeas into a shared bowl. She sprinkles them with salt and dried orange peel, murmuring something about digestion and waking the belly with warmth, not fire. This isn't breakfast as performance, it's breakfast as care. Here's your mainstream fact. While much of Byzantine history focuses on emperors, soldiers, and priests, women's domestic rituals, especially around food, shaped the rhythms of daily life. In noble houses and modest homes alike, morning meals were a time of sharing, healing, and preparation, not just for the day, but for one another. You sip a warm drink offered to you in a clay cup. It's a thin lentil broth scented with rosemary and vinegar. It's not rich, but it's soothing. Theodora explains it's often served after childbirth, or grief, or long fasts. It tells the stomach it's safe again, she says. Historians still argue whether such gendered routines were empowering or limiting, but what's clear in this moment is the power these women hold. They nourish, they gather, they remember. You learn that during fasts, official and unofficial. Women often relied on foraged herbs, dried legumes, and egg substitutes made from whipped pulses and oil. Maria swears she once fooled a bishop with her mock omelet. She winks. You believe her. And here's your quirky tidbit. In certain neighborhoods, women created private recipe scrolls, shared only among sisters, daughters, or apprentices. Not for secrecy, but for preservation. Recipes for fig bread, spiced milk, or the sweet water of lemons boiled thrice and stirred with faith. None survive in the archives, but whispers of them live on. As you pass the bowl of roasted chickpeas around, you feel the unspoken rhythms of the space. One woman starts a tune under her breath, another hums harmony, a third adds percussion by tapping her spoon. It's not a performance, it's just life, unfolding gently. The courtyard glows with the kind of calm that can't be bought, bottled, or baked. It has to be built, meal by meal, morning by morning. You finish the last of your yogurt bread and feel, for the first time today, full without being heavy. Eleni rises. You rise too. The women wave softly, offer little nods, return to their chopping, stirring, humming. You step back into the sun, heart steadied. Jens, Eleni says quietly, is the kind of breakfast that holds you together. You believe her, and you wonder, what do people eat when the world outside the city walls is all they've ever known? You're about to find out. You've spent the morning wrapped in the layers of Constantinople, its grandeur, its alleys, its whispered courtyards. But now Eleni wants you to see how mornings begin far from the capital, in the empire's quieter edges. So, she brings you to the city gate, where a cart waits to carry you toward the Anatolian highlands. It's a long, bumpy ride. The stone roads eventually give way to dirt, the chatter of marketplaces fades into birdsong, and the smell of frying oil becomes the cleaner scent of pine and damp earth. As you climb higher, the air cools. You wrap your cloak tighter and try to keep your teeth from chattering. Your destination is a mountain village built into a slope, where sheep outnumber people and breakfast begins before sunrise. You arrive just as pale light breaks over the hills, casting long shadows over smoke curling from chimneys. A woman named Despina greets you outside her home, her face lined with weather and smiles. She waves you inside, where the walls are lined with sheepskin and a fire crackles with purpose. You sit on a low bench and warm your hands, and Despina begins her morning ritual. She scoops a thick pale mash from a clay pot into a bowl, sprinkles something nutty and golden on top, and hands it to you with a wooden spoon. This is pine nut porridge, made with coarsely ground barley flour, goat milk, and just a bit of wildflower honey. The pine nuts add crunch and a sweet resinous flavor that somehow tastes like both tree bark and joy. You take a slow bite. It's hot, simple, and deeply comforting, like a lullaby you chew. Here's your mainstream fact. In rural parts of the Byzantine Empire, porridges were a staple breakfast, often flavored with what was on hand: dried fruit, nuts, herbs, or fermented milk. Bread, when available, was eaten with soft cheese or dipped in broths, but porridge fed the body and saved the flour. Despina serves you a cup of diluted yogurt drink, not quite kefir, not quite water, cool, tart, and refreshing after the richness of the porridge. She dips her own bread into it, eats slowly, and nods toward the window, where a young boy leads a line of goats out into the mist. This is breakfast built for labor. While you eat, Despina prepares a kind of hand pie filled with boiled greens, onions, and a little fresh curd. The dough is thin and chewy, fried in a shallow pan until crisp. You ask what it's called. She shrugs. Pie, you laugh. She wraps one for you to eat later, when the porridge wears off, she says. She also hands you a small pouch of salted mulberries, an old Highland trick for keeping your strength when there's no time to stop for lunch. They're chewy, slightly sour, and better than any trail mix you ever had. Historians still argue whether rural diets like this were healthier than urban ones. Less sugar, fewer spices, but also less wine and meat. Yet the people here lived long, worked hard, and kept traditions alive through food, music, and morning rituals that never made it into imperial scrolls. Your quirky tidbit? In some regions, villagers flavored their porridge with ashes of burnt rosemary or oak, believing it improved digestion and warded off belly storms. You glance at your now empty bowl and wonder if that smoky note was just the fire or something more medicinal. You step outside with Despina to watch the village stir. Chickens peck at frost-laced soil. Someone is already baking flatbread over hot stones, pressing the dough with a polished river rock. A girl is stirring goat milk with a branch of thyme. For the babies, she says. Eleni joins you, hands in her sleeves. Not fancy, she says, but they never go hungry. And you feel it? This breakfast doesn't aim to impress. It aims to last. To warm hands numb from cold. To coat the stomach before a trek. To offer small, durable joy. As the mist burns off and the sky brightens, you know it's time to head back to the city. But the taste of pine nuts, barley, and mountain air, that'll stay with you. The cart rattles back toward Constantinople, the mountain behind you shrinking with every mile. The city, when it finally reappears on the horizon, feels louder, smokier, and strangely fragile after the stillness of village life. But you're not done yet. Eleni, tireless as ever, wants to show you one last layer of the Byzantine morning. A layer flavored not by status or scarcity, but by discomfort. The kind of meal that's less about enjoyment and more about survival through symptoms. She calls it the morning pharmacy. You call it suspicious. You stop at the home of Eusebios, a former court physician turned street healer who now dispenses wisdom, food, and occasional side-eye from a stall near the old aqueduct. His breakfast? Less a meal, more a medicinal ritual. The first offering, a vinegar tonic, diluted with water and steeped overnight with crushed garlic, mint, and a hint of honey. It smells like salad dressing, drinks like punishment, and leaves your sinuses so clear you could hear a squirrel sneeze in Armenia. You sip, you grimace, use beings. This was a common way to begin the day for those prone to melancholy humors, indigestion, or general gloom. It was believed to rebalance the system, ignite sluggish stomachs, and possibly keep away demons. Possibly. Next, he gives you a pinch of dried bitter greens, which you chew directly. They taste like regret, dandelions, and lost opportunities. Eleni chews hers with alarming serenity. Builds the blood, she says, chewing thoughtfully. You use your mainstream fact. Byzantine medicine was deeply intertwined with diet. Morning meals were sometimes selected not for taste, but for their effects on the body's humors: cold, hot, wet, and dry. Foods were categorized, prescribed, and paired with herbal infusions in the same way modern doctors prescribe vitamins. You're handed a wedge of spiced bread next, dense, dark, and flecked with caraway and black cumin. It's meant to stimulate digestion and settle windy guts, a phrase you'll now never forget. It's surprisingly good, though. The spices feel ancient and medicinal, like someone made a cake out of scrolls. Then comes the oddest item yet: pickled pear slices dipped in a paste of crushed almonds and vinegar. It's chewy, tangy, and nutty. An acquired taste for sure, but not without its charm. Eusebio calls it joint oil. You're not entirely sure if he means metaphorically. He also offers a spoonful of oxymel, that mixture of honey and vinegar from earlier in your journey. This version includes thyme and something called bee-stung nettle root. You try it. Your tongue prickles. Eleni looks pleased. Here's your quirky tidbit. Byzantines believed the timing of food consumption affected its power. Garlic eaten before sunrise was energizing. After sunrise, overheating. Vinegar before food soothed the liver. After food, it clouded the mind. Water had to be room temperature. Wine had to be cut with water. Cheese? Only if your dreams had been peaceful. Eusebius lets you smell a pouch of powdered iris root, which he claims helps align the stomach with God. You take his word for it. He also shows you a dried fig, stuffed with herbs and tiny clove buds, meant to be chewed slowly when one's humors are fussy. You chew it. You feel oddly soothed. Nearby, a woman drinks a thin herbal soup of lentils and rue, traditionally served after illness. It's murky and bitter, but she nods approvingly between sips. It's breakfast, yes, but also ceremony, medicine, penance, and protection. You sip a final cup of lukewarm water, steeped with rose petals and chamomile, meant to calm the blood and ease tension. It tastes like a garden exhale. And now, your body feels restored, not fed, not quite satisfied in the traditional sense, but balanced. Like all your internal levers have been adjusted by a man with a mortar and pestle. Eusebio waves you off with a wink and a warning. Don't mix pickled pears and wine before noon, unless you want to see your future. You'll try to remember that. Eleni links her arm through yours. That, she says, was the sharpest meal we'll have today. And she's right, because next, it's time for the last breakfast. A quiet one, a solemn one, a goodbye. The sun has shifted again, now arcing toward noon, but the mood has changed. There's a hush in the city, not a silence, but a stillness, like something is holding its breath. Elenia walks without speaking, and you follow, your stomach steady, your mind gently fogged from garlic tonics, quince jam, and a morning full of stories. You pass through the neighborhood of the Finar, past crumbling churches, cracked mosaics, and walls scratched with the names of boys who grow into soldiers, or not at all. The air carries the scent of dust, seawater, and faintly wood smoke. A flag flaps limply from a half-toppled tower. This is a story Eleni's never told before, she says, a morning she never wanted to describe, but she brings you to it anyway. It's May 29th, 1453, the final morning of the Byzantine Empire. The city has been under siege for weeks. The Ottomans press from all sides. Food is nearly gone. Hope is brittle. And yet, someone is making breakfast. You meet Nikolaus, a young soldier, barely more than a boy, who sits on a stone step near the inner wall. He holds a crust of bread so dry it could be used as a weapon, and a small jar of olives, cracked in weeping brine. He breaks the bread in half and offers you a piece. You sit beside him, chew slowly. It hurts your teeth. He smiles anyway. "This is all we have left," he says. "But it's better than nothing, and it's warm. Not the food, the sun." His eyes are clear, calm, and impossibly tired. You eat together. No herbs, no cheese, no jam or broth, just dry barley bread that was baked days ago and hidden under a cloak, and olives preserved in salt, because salt lasts longer than peace. There's no fire, no chatter, no priest singing hymns, just birds overhead, wheels clattering in the distance, and the faint thunder of a world ending beyond the walls. Here's your mainstream fact. The Byzantine Empire truly did fall on a Tuesday morning, and while the details of those final hours are still debated, we know that soldiers like Niketas held the walls until they couldn't, and that civilians hid behind doors, whispered prayers, and somehow still cooked what they could. Historians still argue whether the people inside truly believed help was coming, or if they just clung to routines because doing anything else would make it all too real. Nikolaus finishes his bread. He tosses the last olive pit over his shoulder and shrugs. They say if we die on empty stomachs, we won't be allowed to haunt the walls. You laugh. He doesn't. Then he does. He stands, brushes crumbs from his tunic, tightens the strap on his sandals. Then he nods to you. "Thanks for sitting with me," he says. "It helps." You watch him walk away, sword hanging low from his belt, back straight. The bread still sits like a stone in your stomach, and somehow you're glad it does. Eleni is silent. Together, you walk back through the city, now golden with late morning light. You pass bakers who've reopened their shutters, women refilling water jars, a boy dragging a wooden sword and pretending to fight off ghosts. And you understand that every breakfast, whether made in a palace or a mountain hut or a city under siege, carries a kind of defiance, a belief that tomorrow is worth preparing for, even when tomorrow may not come. That's what Byzantines ate in the morning. And now, as we settle down for sleep, let's soften the focus. The sounds of Constantinople begin to fade. The clang of bells, the murmur of markets, the crackle of wood beneath barley bread. All around you the city exhales, its narrow alleys sinking into shadow, its courtyards gathering moonlight like dust. You let the memories drift, warm cheese wrapped in linen, sweet figs soaked in honey, soup sipped in silence beneath a vaulted monastery ceiling. You remember the hiss of garlic in olive oil, the strange clarity of spiced wine, the hum of women sharing food like secrets in a garden of stone. Even in hunger, even in endings, breakfast always returned. A loaf shared, a broth reheated, a fig kept safe for someone else's morning. The empire may be gone, but its flavors linger like ghosts in clay bowls and crumbs in the folds of linen cloth. So now, wherever you are, in a room lit by the soft blue of a screen, curled under blankets, eyes heavy, know that you've walked the same morning paths as emperors and farmers, scribes and shepherds. You've eaten their eggs, sipped their vinegar, and shared a final crust with a soldier who never got to grow old. Close your eyes now. Let the warmth of barley, honey, and history wrap around you. Sleep well, traveler. The table will be set again tomorrow.